Hello and welcome back after a long while to Oaf Culture. I'd ask if you missed me, but I know you haven't. In this video, I want to hurry up and give my first impressions for HBO's The Last of Us. I have been a lover of The Last of Us for the past decade. Now it's a show. I have sort of followed the evolution of this adaptation over the years. Every so often I'd Google it to see what was going on with it. I thought it had to get made because it was that good, but for a while it really wasn't looking so good to me. Now I've finally gotten to see episode 1, and I'm going to tell you what I liked about it. There wasn't much that I didn't like, so I'm sorry, but this is going to be a very unbalanced, positive review. Right off the bat, we have 3 notable casting choices that we see in this first episode. I'm referring to Pedro Pascal as Joel, Bella Ramsey as Ellie, and Merle Dandridge as Marlene. Obviously, Pedro is worth mentioning because if you've been looking forward to the show, unless you're a moron, you've been looking forward to seeing Pedro play Joel. What perfect casting. Years ago, when this was maybe going to be a Sam Raimi movie, I was wanting to see Hugh Jackman, and I had few other ideas about who I'd like to see play Joel. Pedro was a surprise when I saw the announcement. I don't know how long ago that was, but it was a welcome surprise, to be sure. Pedro keeps popping up in things I want to see, notably, obviously, The Mandalorian since 2019. He was in Wonder Woman 1984. Of course, I wanted to see that, and then I saw it, and never mind. But he keeps showing up in stuff, and he keeps being just fine, even if that thing is garbage. So, that show, The Mandalorian, also shows that he can play this hard-traveling father figure to a surrogate child, just as he will be, as we continue to watch him in The Last of Us. Next, I'll talk about Bella Ramsey. She is a great choice to play Ellie. This is not an unpopular opinion by any means, but I loved her in Game of Thrones, and I was excited to see what she'd do as our girl Ellie. She brings it in this first episode, and the writing and her performance really let us know just who Ellie is. She's tough, quick, feisty, and can easily become sweet, I'm sure, as we go along in the future episodes. I want to mention Merle Dandridge as Marlene in particular, because she is the actual original actress for Marlene. She portrays Marlene in both Last of Us games, and now she's gotten to reprise her role in this live-action show. This is just really cool to see happen. She's been this character for a whole decade now across 2 different mediums. Crossing entertainment mediums is sort of a rarity. I mean, we see it happen here and there. Obviously, it's not a new thing, but it's kind of like, it's not every day. You know, we have Matt Ryan from the Arrowverse. He played John Constantine. He's also been Constantine in a lot of animated stuff, and that's where I think we see it the most, is from animated to live action. We've seen that a lot recently. Kevin Conroy got done dirty when he played a live action Bruce Wayne in the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover special on the CW. And that was garbage, but hey, he got to do it. And you know, he's usually a voice actor, but he got to show up in live action. This is like that, but I'd say even rarer than animation to live action, of course, is going from a video game to a live action production. First of all, that just doesn't usually happen to begin with, but being in both as your same character, that's worth mentioning. And that's really all I have to say about that. I found out just a little while ago that she was going to reprise her role, and I'm not really familiar with her in much of anything else, but that is still really cool. So I needed to bring that up here. I know I said I'd talk about 3 casting choices, but I don't want to leave Tess out, so I'm going to talk about her. Our other main character, when episode 1 really gets going, is Tess. So once the story is done being set up and we actually get into the meat of it, we meet Tess, and she's played by Anna Torv, or it might be Anna, I'm not really sure. She's an Australian actress. I'm really not familiar with her, but she's doing a great job of portraying this tough woman who's going to mess you up for sure. Also, she looks nothing like her real life self in this show. Like, here's a picture of her in real life. She looks pretty. She's a nice looking woman. In the show, she looks like utter trash. So good for her playing the part. Good for the costume and makeup people making her look that way. Really awesome. It really sells her personality in the show. I didn't want to leave her out while discussing the cast. But now I'll get on with talking about the actual narrative and presentation and whatnot. Now we're going to get into spoiler territory for sure, by the way. So that's your warning. Spoiler time. This episode opens with a scene in the 60s that we had not seen before, where on a talk show, we get the scientific setup for how, perhaps with climate change as a catalyst, this fungal infection is able to cause the problems it does when the story actually starts. This is a fine scene. I thought it didn't really need to be there, but it's really interesting to think that maybe this was something that was on the radar and there was nothing they could do about it, or it was just kind of a ticking time bomb, really, that eventually this was going to happen. Just with, they said in the scene that if the world were to get warmer, maybe these funguses and parasites and whatever could mutate in such a way as to affect humans like they do with bugs and things. So it's a fine scene. It wasn't necessary for me, but it does get the audience on the same page about, like, how can this happen? Why do I care that this is happening? Can I relate anything to it? So it kind of gets the explanation out of the way. It makes this seem like something that could really happen. If there was such a fungus that could affect humans, who knows what could happen, right? So, very interesting. And for some reason, I just really like the style of the scene. Also, the guy from Silicon Valley who plays Nelson Baguetti is in it. So, that was kind of funny. That's pretty disconnected, that scene, from the real story. But I think it's a fine setup and explanation to get us going. I just, like I said, I liked the style of it. It was interesting. I think this first episode, in general, not because of this scene, but overall, in general, I think this first episode is an indication that this will be a great adaptation. There are several scenes that have been added to the opening of the story that we see in this first episode, and they give context that wasn't really necessary in the game. When you're in the game, you're in it, you can look around, you can kind of get some vibes just from scenery, from some dialogue, from some interacting with stuff that we don't really get given to us when we're watching a show. So they've got to do some extra work and portray that and film something to show you, especially if you haven't played the game, obviously. So, for example, we see a sort of day in the life of Joel's daughter Sarah in 2003. I'm going to pause right here because I'm a scatterbrain. I'm going to say that's a change from the game being in 2003. It's not incredibly important, but it's just an interesting talking point that they've adapted this to start in 2003. In the game, the outbreak took place in 2013. And so the bulk of the story, the rest of that, after that first half hour or hour of gameplay, probably closer to half an hour, all of that was taking place starting in 2033. So that was in the future, and it still is in the future from our perspective today. But now, in this show, we're starting in 2003, and so the main story will happen in the present day for us watching it now, 2023. I should mention, the game came out in 2013, so the outbreak in the game was contemporary at that time, and now, interestingly, they want the show to take place the bulk of the story that we actually care about, it's taking place now. Or in the story, it could be taking place right now as we're watching it in current year 2023. So both versions of the story take place at a contemporary time, just in two different ways. Interesting. So that is a change, but not like a major deal by any means. And it's still keeping kind of with the spirit, I think. Anyway, in the background, when we get this day in the life of Sarah in 03, we can see sort of a slow burn of the events leading up to the outbreak scenes we remember from the game. So slowly, it seems like chaos is building in Austin, Texas, as the day goes on. We start in the morning, and we kind of see her at school, and we see little things here and there throughout the day that could be, we think, but are not confirmed for a while. They could be signs and symptoms of the infection kind of spreading, but they're just little things that could be nothing, but eventually it becomes quite clear to us once we hit the turning point. So that was really cool. I think that provides some really interesting context because we don't really see in the game this build-up. We don't see in the game that this took any time to begin, really. We hear this and that about it, but here we get to see it really build up. Watching the show, we get the idea that there was this build up, and the government, I'm sure, we see police doing things, we see planes flying overhead. So the government is trying to figure out what's going on, and they're trying to keep it quiet. And then in the middle of the night, just several hours later, it becomes clear that they could not contain this. Everything's out of control, and no one's prepared. And that makes it feel real. We didn't really need that in the game. We could just kind of jump in with it was sort of a cold open when Sarah woke up in the game, and just everything was nuts, and she was having to figure it out. Not the same in the show, but definitely good for the audience who hasn't played the game. Something legitimately scary happens over the course of the day in the afternoon when Sarah is visiting with the neighbors next door. We still don't know it at the time. It's one of the several little things we see that turn out to be symptoms. But the old lady who lives there, who seemingly, like we can gather that she's suffering from Alzheimer's or dementia. She's just really old, kind of not responsive to a lot of stuff. But we see in this scene where she's making this face, and I'll put it on the screen if I can. She's making this face behind Sarah, and Sarah has no clue. And that turns out to definitely be a symptom of the infection within her. Now, of course, we don't know for sure when we're seeing that. So I was just thinking, is that a symptom? Is she infected, or is she just being weird because of the other normal stuff she's got going on? But of course I'm thinking, like, it's gotta be the infection. It's gotta be the fungal virus, or why would they show me this, right? So, but that was legitimately pretty scary. Like, that was an intense moment. That was a very good horror shot, I guess. That was an actually scary moment in the show, which I didn't expect to really be scared, because generally I know what to expect from this story. So then later, when Sarah wakes up during the chaos of the outbreak, and that's in the first few hours of the next day after midnight, we get the scenes we're familiar with, where Joel and Tommy come and get her, and they're driving through town trying to leave, and there's enough authenticity to the game for those of us who played it to be familiar, and I enjoyed that. And so overall in this episode, the changes that they make really feel additive to me. So I feel like we're not missing anything that I wish we had from the game. I think they've done a really good job of adding things and not taking away. And that's refreshing. A lot of times you see an adaptation not include something that you would have liked. But here, I was just really happy with everything they included and everything they added throughout this whole episode. It's fun to get extra context for all the things we've mentioned so far, and it's also fun to see straight remakes of scenes that I remember from the game, like riding around in the truck when the chaos is breaking out. Eventually, just like we see in 2013 in the game, Sarah is killed when a soldier is instructed to kill her and Joel in case they're infected. So the U.S. military, we see immediately, just like in the game, is trying to contain the outbreak by any means necessary. And we see that they are not above killing maybe definitely innocent people just to be on the safe side about the infection. This moment is heartbreaking, and it made me hurt for Joel all over again. Just like playing the game, maybe more. I just really felt it a little more than I expected to. It's just super sad. It puts you on the same page with Joel, and it really, I think, informs his character going forward. So we know exactly where he's coming from when we see him after this happens. So then, we do get to cut to 20 years later. This is another spot where a lot of context scenes are added in that we didn't get in the game. In the game, when we reach the present day, the quote-unquote present day of 20 years later, we get to walk around the environment and we see the general oppression that people are dealing with in the quarantine zone. In the show, we get a good long look at just how dirty this system is. We see a drawn-out scene of Fedra, which is a new thing that's in response to this outbreak. That's the Federal Disaster Response Agency, Fedra, Fedra. We see them killing an infected child who shows up coming in towards the city from the apocalyptic wasteland outside of it. We see them pretending that they're going to help, but they see that this kid is infected, so they give a lethal injection. There you go. Then we see Joel working in the city, in the quarantine zone, as somebody who, right then, this is his job. He's doing whatever jobs need to happen, but he is somebody, in this case, that is going to dispose of this kid's body along with the bodies of other people who have met the same fate. So that's a pretty gruesome thing we get to see in this episode, and it just drives home the harsh reality that these people are now dealing with 20 years later. First of all, it certainly ain't any better 20 years later, and society just seems to be hanging on by a thread. And that's very clear from these scenes that we get 20 years later in the quarantine zone. Also, there's no cure for being infected, so maybe we can't fault Fedra for taking the action they are of killing people to try to control this, but the way that it's done still stings, and that's the point of what we're seeing, is that it still feels dirty and underhanded, and it just seems generally with this and other things they're doing that they're in charge, and they don't seem to care for the livelihood of the people living within the quarantine zones. Of course, there's multiple layers to it. It is clearly just supplies are scarce, and just everything you might expect from what a government would do in a post-apocalyptic time. We see several little things here and there to show us that Joel has become someone who is sacrificing his morals just to survive in this world. He is participating in various criminal activities out of necessity, and we can easily assume he'd rather not do this. I mean, a normal person like we saw him as at the beginning of the episode, probably, he was an upstanding guy. He was doing honest work at that time. But now he just seems pretty scummy. And this is just out of necessity. He's doing what he can to survive. I'm sure he'd rather not, but he's just trying to put his head down and not think about the trouble that he might have to cause in order to make it himself. We see that he's working with Tess, and we see a little bit of the relationship between them that gets hinted at in the game. So that's a little extra context there. We see her sleep next to him, and so in the game we know that there was some kind of relationship that they had, so we kind of see that here. A really interesting change from the game's story is how Tess and Joel wind up in charge of Ellie to begin with. So we get some extra context for Ellie. First of all, she's being held by the Fireflies when we first see her. And I think they were also introduced well. They're kind of a mysterious faction that we find out more about as we go. At the very beginning, the first time we see them, they're clearly just a rebel group fighting Fedra. But then we get to see Marlene, and she's the boss of the Fireflies in this area. And she's figured out, we learn, over the past at least several days, that Ellie is immune. So, we find that out. It's been, I think we find out the standard, just like in the game, 3 weeks since Ellie has been bitten, and she's still not turned into a zombie of any kind. So it's clear to Marlene by this point that Ellie is special. So just like in the game, there are people who have scammed Joel and Tess. So they start trying to hunt Robert down, and if I remember correctly, in the game, you find him and Tess shoots him. Well, that doesn't happen this time. They end up tracking Robert and his group down, and then run into Marlene and what's left of the Fireflies after they've had a fight with Robert and his crew, and Robert's dead when Joel and Tess get there. So then they run into Marlene. Marlene is hurt just like in the game, and she says, "Hey, will you take Ellie and deliver her to these other Fireflies outside of this city?" So this is convenient. It is convenient that they're running into each other in this meeting, but it doesn't feel forced or too convenient. Like, it just feels like something that could happen. The factions of kind of the underworld mingled together, interacted, and as a result, this happened. And now Ellie is going with Joel and Tess. It's pretty good. I liked it. It was concise. It kept things moving, and it surprised me upon seeing Marlene in the hallway. And if you watch the episode, you know what I'm talking about. But they arrive, they open this door, and boom, there's Marlene. So then we see something very familiar from the game soon after, which is Tess and Joel are trying to smuggle Ellie away from the city. I really enjoyed this piece because it reminded me a lot of that part of the game. The scenery was perfect. So they're in these ruins outside the walls of the quarantine zone. It's getting patrolled by Fedra folks. So they're sneaking through, and it really took me back to that part of the game. The architecture looks the same. They're going through this pipe with holes in it, and that's a part of the game you do. It just really felt the same. It felt like perfect screen, one screen to a different kind of screen adaptation there. I really enjoyed that part. So this is just about the end of the episode, and Joel and Tess are finding out here that Ellie has a bite and should be sick, somehow is not. That's been a secret until now, and they get caught by a Fedra officer that Joel has interacted with earlier in the episode, and so he's checking them for infection. Ellie has to stab him. That was just really well written. It makes it feel real that she is trying to not get found out here. I just really enjoyed that scene. It felt good. It felt intense and really able to hold my attention there. So they get caught, and so they're held at gunpoint by the Fedra officer that he sold drugs to. Joel sold them drugs earlier in the episode. And Joel has a flashback to when he and Sarah were at gunpoint 20 years ago, and he snaps and he beats this guy's face in, and it's intense, but we don't have to feel too sorry for the guy because he's clearly pretty scummy both times that we've seen him throughout this episode. So right there, that's a little bit of a change. We didn't see that same, I don't remember ever seeing that same kind of just rage out of Joel. So that is an interesting character moment, but even if we aren't happy with what he's doing, we can understand where he's coming from there. So then we see Tess, Joel, and Ellie go further away from the quarantine zone, and they're trying to deliver Ellie to the Fireflies in exchange for a truck to help Joel find Tommy. So, Joel and Tommy haven't seen each other for a while. In the game, they had some kind of falling out. Don't know if there was a falling out in the show yet or not, but Joel is worried about his brother Tommy, so he wants a truck. So that's what they've agreed to, and that's a neat change, that in exchange for delivering Ellie, they should get these supplies that they need. I think in the game it was just another job that would pay well, get them some guns, other stuff they need, whatever. But it all fits together really well in the show, and it's still not in a way that feels too convenient or anything. I really enjoyed how it all fit together there. So in the last shot, we see them going towards the iconic skyscrapers from the game, where they're broken down and one's leaning on the other one. And from afar, we see our first clicker on top of a ruined building. And it's just good. It's just like, yep, this is The Last of Us. We are here. That was just such a good, fun outro. It wasn't serious. It is kind of like winking at the viewer, like, here we go, boys. But I really enjoyed it just the same. So we're going to try to wrap it up now. I was so excited to see this show, and the first episode did not disappoint me in the slightest. I'm impressed by how much ground they covered in just this first one. I wondered, before we got to see it, the past several weeks, longer than that, if just this first episode's entire runtime would be taken up by the opening in Austin, just covering kind of the setup and the build-up and the climax of the outbreak. But that took up less than half of the episodes. That was a really pleasant surprise for me once that was over, and I paused HBO and I saw that there was still so much episode left to go. I was really excited to really get to dive into the story all at once there. So I really liked that. That was a good first episode. I'm sure some people may say as a result, like, oh, it wasn't very focused. It's not a very focused episode. They do too many things, but man, there's a butt ton of exposition to get through. I'm impressed at the efficiency and clarity with which they did it. And it was a great episode. I'm sure we're going to get some more, just a lot more linearity and focus in the following episodes, because all the setup has been done by now. So I'm ready to just dive into the rest of the show. I wish they would just release all of it all at once, but that's not how HBO works. So I'm excited to see it next week. This episode does a great job of establishing the lore. Like I said, there was all this exposition to do, and they did it really well. We see Fedra and a pretty good explanation of who they are and what they're about. We see the Fireflies as maybe freedom fighters against them. We don't really know that much about the Fireflies yet, but we see those two opposing factions. We see Joel's transition from being what seems like a good-natured, normal guy to being a hardened guy who's looking out for himself first. He's looking out for number one 20 years later, after losing his daughter. And she was the most important person to him back in the day. Now she's gone. He's become different. He's changed for the worse. And so that is something really that isn't spent that much time on in the game. Like we don't really get to see it. So it kind of feels like maybe Pedro's Joel, to me, feels like a little worse of a person right now than Joel in the game by this point. But they're establishing his character really well. And Joel in the game should feel, he is a worse person than I think he feels like when you're starting the game. But it just doesn't translate so well. You don't see as much of the underhanded stuff he's participating in. So that is something. He's an everyman who's really just gone down a dark path, and they've established that really well in this first episode. We see that he's not necessarily a good man, but I think we can empathize, and we can see where he's coming from even if we don't support his actions. I'm excited to see the further development of Joel and Ellie. And Ellie's already showing bits of charm, but mostly right now through being foul-mouthed and ready to insult anyone who gets on her bad side, which is a good portion of Ellie's character, but I'm sure we're going to see her open up and become kind of that bright light in this bleak world that she is in the game. The characterizations we've seen in just this episode are true to the source material, and I'm happy about that. We've seen good stuff from Joel, Ellie, Tess, Tommy. Tommy is just pretty much the same. He's just the brother right now, so that's good. We got some extra context that we didn't get in the game, but it was mostly, I'd say, necessary for turning it into a TV show where not everybody has played the game. Now you got to do the setup and the exposition again anew in the show, right? And I'm happy about what we got. It was a treat to see so much extra stuff that feeds into a story that I already really like. I'm excited to see where the show goes from here and how else they can bring back memories of the game or perhaps try to improve upon it. I do know, something I've read is that instead of spores that you breed in that give you the infection, so everybody's always wearing a gas mask if they're in a dangerous spot in the games. I saw somewhere, I've seen a couple times actually, that it's going to be tendrils. I don't know what that's even going to look like, but tendrils instead of spores that have the infection. I do wonder if that's just an excuse to show the actors' faces instead of having them wear gas masks. But we'll see. I don't imagine that that'll make that big of a difference. It's not going to make a big difference to the narrative or anything. So I am interested to see if anything cool comes of the tendrils. Maybe they're scarier. Maybe they're just really scary. So great if so. I may have to come back next week or, sometime soon after episode 2 comes out and talk about episode 2. So that's it for this one. If you're finding my channel for the first time, feel free to subscribe, perhaps. I upload once in a blue moon right now, but I'd like to make it more frequent. I usually talk about superhero stuff, but I love The Last of Us, gaming, etc. I've been focusing lately on my other channel, HandsomeOaf, and that's a gaming channel. And I've been doing some Let's Play type content over there for a while. I've done Monkey Island, as in the first game, Secret of Monkey Island, the second game, Monkey Island 2, LeChuck's Revenge, and the newest one that just came out, Return to Monkey Island. I've done a Let's Play of all three of those, and I just finished doing something entirely different, which is my first ever playthrough of Resident Evil 4 over there. So I'll link that channel in the description. So all of you wonderful people watching this video, if anybody ever sees it, can look over there and see me get killed over and over as Leon Kennedy. So anyway, thanks for being here, my friend. I'll see you later. Remember that God is real and named Jesus, and he thinks you're swell. Bye.